Let's learn how to upload a file using FastAPI. We're going to start in this video by defining some code to upload a file to FastAPI using an HTML form, and then we're going to learn how to handle the submission of that file on our FastAPI backend endpoint. And as well as a single file, we're also going to learn how to handle the upload of multiple files in a single FastAPI endpoint. After that, we're going to dive into Dropzone.js, which is a JavaScript library that you can use to upload multiple files using AJAX requests. We're going to see how we can wire up FastAPI on the back end to handle those submissions. And in the next video, we'll see how we can handle these submissions using a library such as React.js on the front end. But for now, let's get started. Now we're going to be following along with this page of the FastAPI documentation to begin with, and this page tells us some information about how we can handle requests that are coming into our FastAPI application when those requests contain files. So on the right hand side at this sidebar here, I'm going to click this link, File Parameters with Upload File, and I'll leave the link to this below the video. Now as you can see below, there are two ways to define these endpoints. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we can see that. In the first of these two functions, we have an endpoint that has a file parameter, and the type of that file is annotated, which comes from Python's standard libraries typing module, and the actual type underlying that is bytes, raw bytes that are coming into the FastAPI endpoint, and it's annotated with this file object that comes from FastAPI. Now as it says below here, using the upload file type, that has several advantages over the raw bytes, and this is the technique that's used in the second endpoint. That has the same parameter of file, but it's type annotated here with the upload file type. Now what are the advantages of upload file? Let's scroll down. First of all, we don't have to use this file object as a default value for the parameter, and also, more importantly, it uses a spooled file. And this means that the file is stored in memory up to a maximum size limit, and then after passing that limit, it is then stored onto the disk. So using upload file will work well for large files such as images and videos and large binaries. And that's because it's not going to try and store the entire file in memory. Instead, it's going to spool the file to disk after a certain maximum limit is reached. So you want to use upload file whenever you're dealing with potentially large files. And some other benefits down here, you can see that we can get metadata from the uploaded file, and that it also has a file-like async interface. So let's go down again, and we're going to see that upload file has some attributes that we're going to use. For example, the file name of the uploaded file will contain the original file name from the client, and we can also access the content type of the uploaded file, for example a JPEG file, and as well as that we can access an attribute called file, which is actually the underlying spooled temporary file in Python. An upload file also has some async methods that follow the file interface in Python. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to scroll back to the top of this page because it contains this important information here. To receive uploaded files in FastAPI, we need to install this library called Python multipart. So I'm going to copy the pip install command, and I'm going to go to VS Code, and in the terminal where I've got a virtual environment activated, I'm going to paste in that pip install command, and as you can see it's already installed on my computer, but you will need to install that if you're going to receive uploaded files in FastAPI. Now within this VS Code directory that I've got open, I also have a main.py file that imports the FastAPI object and then instantiates it and stores it in a variable called app. So we're now going to use this file to define some routes that can handle uploading files to FastAPI. So what I'm going to start by doing at the top, as well as importing FastAPI, I'm also going to import that type called upload file that we've seen in the documentation. And then below the FastAPI app object, let's define a post route here, and we'll give that an endpoint of upload file, and below that we'll define the actual function for this route, and we're going to make that an async function called create upload file. Now that is going to take a parameter called file, and that's going to have a type of upload file. And what we're going to do for now, I'm going to go back to the FastAPI documentation and go back to that page that we were looking at, and I'm just going to return the file name when it's uploaded to that particular endpoint. So let's go back to VS Code, and the return statement is simply going to return the uploaded file's name back to the client. What I'm going to do now is create an HTML file within this directory, and we're going to define an HTML form that contains a file field. So on the left hand side, I'm going to create a new file here, and let's just call that index.html. And within this file, I'm going to paste some boilerplate HTML, and that's just an HTML tag that contains a head and a body. What we're going to do next in this video within the body tag is we're going to define a form element, and we're going to define a field within that to upload a file. So let's start by defining the forms method, which is going to be a post request, and that's going to be a post request coming into this FastAPI endpoint that we've just defined. And we need to tell the form to send the post request to this endpoint here, which is going to be localhost 8000/uploadFile. So let's go back to the HTML file, and we can define the action attribute here and set it equal to that endpoint there. And that means that when the form is actually submitted, it's going to send the post request data to that particular URL, and that will then be handled on the back end using FastAPI. Let's go back to the form, and there's one other attribute that we're going to define on this form element. I'm going to do it on a new line here, and that's the enc type, which stands for encoding type. Now when you submit a form that contains files, you need to set the encoding type to multipart/form data, and that means that the data that's in the form is going to be submitted to the back end using a form data object. We're going to see more about that in the next video where we use React to actually submit a form. But just know that you definitely need to include this encoding type on a form element when you're submitting a form that contains files. Now within the form, we're going to define an input element, and that is of type equals file here. And we need to give this input a name so that the backend knows what to look for. In our case, let's call it file_upload, and then we can close off the input tag. And below the input, we're going to define a submit button so that we can actually submit the form, and then that will send the data to the backend. Now there's something important to highlight here, and that's the name of this input element. It's got a name of file upload, and you need to match that on your backend for the parameter to the function. We've currently got a parameter of file, so we're going to need to change that to match the name that's coming through from the HTML form. So let's change it to file upload, and then we can use the file upload's file name when we return that dictionary response. So let's now run the server, and we're going to try and actually submit this HTML form and see what happens on our FastAPI route. So what I'm going to do is install the 𝗰𝗽𝗃𝗁 server here, and that's an asynchronous server that you can use with FastAPI. Once that's installed, we can run a command, 𝗰𝗃𝗁, and we're going to reference the main file and the app object within that file, and we can use the -- reload flag so that whenever we change any of the code, it's going to restart the server. Once that server's running, we are going to open this HTML file where we've defined the form, and I'm going to go to the browser, and this is the page here. We have an input of type file on the left hand side and a button to submit the form on the right, so a very basic user interface. But what we're going to do is we're going to select a file now, and within the directory I have this subdirectory called source files, and I'm going to select, for example, this file here that contains a picture of a dog, and then we're going to submit that to the server, and you can see that we get back some JSON data. We have a key of file name, and the value is the name of the file, and that matches what we have on the back end for main.py. We're returning that key, and we're referencing the name of the file that was uploaded. You can also see at the bottom on the terminal that a post request was made to the /uploadFile endpoint, and that will come into this endpoint and trigger this function, which is returning that data. So that's good, we're able to accept the file on the back end. Let's now try and save it to the file system when it comes into this route. So what we're going to do is define a directory where we want to store the uploaded files on the server. So to do that, I'm going to import from pathlib the path object. Once we've got that import, I'm going to set a variable called upload directory, and that's going to be equal to the current directory, which you can get just by instantiating a path object. And from the current directory, we'll reference a subdirectory which we'll call uploads. So what I'm going to do is create that directory called uploads within the root of this project, and that is where the uploaded files are going to be stored on the server's file system. And of course, in a real application, you can set this to anywhere you want on your file system, or you can set it to an S3 bucket or anywhere on the cloud. But for the purposes of this video, let's just store things within the root directory. Now, in order to store the content of the files, we're going to need to actually read that file within this function here. So let's start by writing some new code here. We're going to read the file that's been uploaded, so let's define a variable called data, and we can use the file uploads read method in order to do that, and that is an asynchronous function, so we can use the await keyword, and that's going to wait on that being read before continuing with the function. And if you're using the await keyword to read this file, remember you need to have your function be async ready, so make sure you have the async keyword. Below that, I'm going to create a variable called save to, and that's going to be equal to the upload directory, which is this uploads directory that we have here. And below that, we're going to just save the file with a file name of whatever was uploaded from the client. So this is the location and the file name of where we want to store the content that's been uploaded. So let's open that particular location with a with open statement in Python. We'll reference that location called save to, and we want to write, and we want to specify that we're writing bytes here. And we can do that by opening this file object with the mode of write bytes, as it says here, and we can reference the open file, and we'll just call that f. Once we have that file opened, we can call the file.write function, and what we're going to do is write the data that we've read on line 10 to that particular location on the file system. And that's the changes we need to actually take the uploaded file, read it into memory, and then save it to that location on line 11. So let's try this out again. We're going to go back to our HTML form here, and if we choose another file from that directory, let's try this JSON sample. If we submit that to the backend, we get back the same response. But let's now go to VS Code, and you can see on the left hand side within this uploads directory that we now have the file that has been uploaded called jsonsample.pdf. That's now stored in that directory, and it's now on our server on the server's file system. So just to reiterate what we're doing, on line 10 we read the data from the file that's been uploaded. On line 11 we define a location to save that data to, and then on line 12 we open a file at that location with a mode of write bytes, and then we write that data to that location. So that's how to take a file that's been uploaded from an HTML form and then store it on the file system on a server that's using FastAPI. And we can also define optional uploads. I'm going to go back to the documentation. On the right hand side we have this section here for optional file upload, and this can be done using standard type annotations. For example, using the upload file object, we can define a union type with the second type equal to none, and the default value is set to none as well in case a file has not been uploaded. So if you have an endpoint and you don't require a file to be uploaded, this is one way to do that. Now on the right hand side again here we have a section for multiple file uploads. Let's now learn how to upload multiple files to a single FastAPI function. And it's very simple to annotate this. We just declare a list of bytes or a list of upload file types. And you can see that down here in this function we have a parameter of files, and that is a list of upload file objects. So we're going to use this technique in that function of defining a list of upload file types. Let's go back to VS Code, and I'm going to change the parameter here from file upload to file uploads, and then we'll make the type for that a list of these upload file objects. And if you're using a version of Python below 3.9, you will need to annotate this slightly differently. If we go back to the documentation, this tab here on 3.6+, you can see that you will actually need to import the list type from the typing module. It was only in Python 3.9 and above that you can use the list as a type as well as a built-in function. So let's go back to VS Code, and we're going to keep this code largely the same, but what we're going to do is iterate over each file upload that is in this list of file uploads. So let's go into the function here and define a for loop. We're going to say for file upload in file uploads, and we can keep the rest of this code largely the same. We're going to read the particular file that we're iterating over, and then we're going to save it to that directory on the file system. And we can now do this for a list of files by iterating over each one at a time and saving the content to the file system. And the only other thing we need to do is change the return statement after the for loop. I'm going to paste in a bit of code here, and instead of returning a single file name, we're now using a list comprehension to get the file name of every file that's been uploaded and returning that as a list. So we're going to test this out in a second, but we need to make a couple of changes to the index.html template that we're using. Firstly, we need to change file upload to file uploads, and remember that's because the name attribute of this input element must match the parameter name that we're defining on the FastAPI function, so that will need to be changed to file uploads. And because we're wanting to allow multiple file uploads, we can use the multiple attribute here, and that will tell the browser that the file field can accept multiple files for that particular field. So we can now save these files and go back to the browser, and what I'm going to do in this case is choose all 5 of these files, and we're going to open all 5 of them, and you can see that because we have the multiple attribute, we have all 5 of these files for this particular field. Before we submit that, I'm going to go back to VS Code and I'm going to clear out this file from the uploads directory, and then we can try submitting this to see if all 5 of these end up in that particular directory. So let's submit the form, and we get back a list of file names here as we expect from the FastAPI function. And if we go back to VS Code, you can see within the uploads directory we have all 5 of these files that have been uploaded and saved to that directory. So that's how we can upload multiple files using a single file field in the front end and accept those on the back end and save them to the file system. And what we're going to do to finish this video is learn how to integrate this with Dropzone.js. I'm going to go back to the browser and go to the documentation for Dropzone. And I'm actually going to open the tab for the home page here, and you can see that Dropzone is a simple JavaScript library. It helps you add file drag and drop operations and functionality to your web forms, and it's one of the most popular drag and drop libraries on the web. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to install this and then use it to upload files using AJAX requests, which is slightly different to submitting the form as we've been doing so far on this page here, where we submit the entire form and then we get a reload of the page with the response from the server. What we're going to do with Dropzone is submit these files using an AJAX request. Now Dropzone is an external JavaScript library, so we're going to copy these script and link tags and we're going to import them into our template that we've got within this index.html file. So let's go back to that, and within the head tag I'm going to paste these imports in. And this contains the JavaScript and the CSS for the Dropzone.js package. And once we've got these installed, let's go back to the documentation. And on the setup section of the sidebar, we're going to click the declarative setup. And this section tells us how we can create a Dropzone upload with HTML attributes. So you can see here we have a form element, and it has an action that will tell the form where to send the data. And this has a class of Dropzone and an ID of 𝗦𝗵𝗽𝗀. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to VS Code, and I'm going to replace this form element here with the Dropzone form declaration, and I'm replacing the action with the action that we have sending the data to our FastAPI endpoint. And I'm going to remove this enc type here as well. So we have a form, it has the same action, but now we have a class of Dropzone and we have an ID of 𝗦𝗵𝗽𝗀. And that's actually all we need here. We don't need the input of type file or the submit button, because Dropzone itself is going to handle submitting all that data to the server, and it's going to use AJAX requests to do that. So let's go to our page and we're going to see how this looks like at the moment. We're not completed the setup, but if we go back here you can see that we have some kind of new field on this page. This is the Dropzone element, but it's not been instantiated properly. We're going to learn how to do that now. If we go back to the documentation, let's go to this page on the imperative setup, and you can see in the code below here that we create a new Dropzone object, and the first argument to that is the selector of the HTML element that we want to add Dropzone to, and the second parameter is optional, but that contains some options that you can then apply to your Dropzone element that can change the way it behaves and other things such as the style of the object. So we're going to use this technique here. I'm going to copy this code and we're going to go back to VS Code, and within the body I'm going to define a script tag here, and remember to close that off as well, and I'm going to paste in the code that we copied. So we're instantiating a new Dropzone object, and remember the first parameter here, that's the element we want to actually apply this to. So we're going to remove that and we're going to reference 𝗦𝗵𝗽𝗀 which is the ID of this form element. And I'm also going to remove this URL option here. We don't need to tell Dropzone where to submit the data to, because we have an action attribute directly on the form itself that will tell the form where the location is that it should send its data to. Now we are going to set one option here, and that's going to be an option called param name, and we're going to set that equal to file_uploads. And the reason for this is because if we go back to main.py, this is the actual name that we're expecting from the front end. It's called file uploads, and we are using that as an argument or a parameter to our FastAPI function. So that needs to be the name of the data that we're sending for these file fields from the front end. So we're going to make sure we call it file uploads by overriding this param name. If we go back to the Dropzone documentation for the declarative section, you can see this information here. If you want a name other than file, you can configure Dropzone with the option of param name, and that's what we've done, because by default it will have a name of file. So let's now test this out, and we're going to go back to this page. You can see that when we refresh the page we now have a different UI because we've instantiated the Dropzone element, and we can drag and drop files into this, or we can click it to get the file browser. And I'm going to select all 5 of these again, and you can see that it's uploading each of them, but the server is responding with a 0 code and the objects are not actually being uploaded. If we go back to VS Code and look at the terminal here, you can see we have a 405 method not allowed. Now the problem is, on the browser we're just loading this HTML file onto the page, and we're trying to upload to a different origin, which is our FastAPI server that's running at localhost and port 8000. What we need to do in order to make this work, because it's an AJAX request that's coming from a different origin, we need to add CORSMiddleware to our FastAPI application. And if we do that, we can then accept the files coming from a different origin using the AJAX request. So I'm going to load up some documentation from FastAPI here. And this is from the page on CORS, which I'll link below the video. And you can see what the definition of an origin is from this page. It's a combination of the protocol, HTTP or HTTPS, the domain, which can be basically anything, including localhost, and also the port. And you can see that these are all different origins here. For example, using HTTP and localhost, and then using HTTPS and localhost, it's a different origin. And if you have two processes on localhost with different port numbers, these are going to be different origins as well. So the problem here is that we have two pages or two processes that are running on different origins, and our server is therefore going to flag this, and we're not going to be able to upload these files from a different origin. Now, in order to resolve this, we can go to the right hand side and we can use the CORSMiddleware that's built into FastAPI. And the steps for using that, we can import it, and then we can create a list of allowed origins as strings. And finally, we can add this as a middleware to our FastAPI application. So let's scroll down here, and I'm going to copy the import statement, and we're going to go back to VS Code to the main.py file. And at the top here, I'm going to import the CORSMiddleware. What we need to do after that, if we go back to the documentation, we can define a list of allowed origins, and then we can set up this middleware and add it to the app object. So what I'm going to do is copy this code here where we're adding the middleware, and I'm going to go back to VS Code, and underneath this app object, I'm going to paste that in. And for simplicity, the allowed origins, I'm just going to set that to a list where we have this star character. That's a wildcard that tells the server that any origin is allowed. That's not recommended for production, so don't do that in a real system. You can define your allowed origins explicitly using this list, but we're just going to allow the uploads to come from any origin. Once we've done that, we can go back to our page here, and I'm going to try re-uploading these files using the Dropbox element. If we take all of these files, you can see that they are now all uploaded. We have this success tick message appearing, and if we go back to the server, you can see in the uploads directory we have these files. Now I'm not sure if these were already here, so let's delete these and we can try this again, and we're going to select, let's just say, the first 3 of these files, and let's now go back to the server, and you can see we have the 3 files in the directory here. And you can see in the terminal that Dropzone is actually sending 3 post requests to this backend, and it's actually sending 1 file at a time, so we don't need to annotate this with a list of upload files. Instead, we can just create the normal file upload parameter that is equal to an upload file, and we can get rid of these statements here. And finally, within the return statement, we can just say file upload.filename here. And the last thing we need to do, remember, is match the name of the parameter with what we have as a param name when we create a Dropzone object here. So let's make that file upload. Now we can go back to the browser and test this out. If we refresh the page and select the top 2 of these files and try and upload them, you can see we get a successful upload, and this time the files have come through to the back end. Again, they're coming through one at a time, as you can see at the bottom here, and each one of them is treated as a separate request. So that's what Dropzone does. It takes a list of files that you've dragged and dropped or selected in that Dropzone element, and it sends an asynchronous request, an AJAX request, to the FastAPI server, and it's going to send a new AJAX request for each file to the FastAPI endpoint, which will then save the file to the file system, as you can see on lines 19 to 22. And because the AJAX request is sent from a different origin on the browser, we need to add this middleware, the CORSMiddleware, to the app object, and we can specify some allowed origins and methods to that middleware. So that's all for this video. We've seen how to take a file that's been uploaded from the front end, or multiple files from the front end, and then store those files on the file system using a FastAPI endpoint. We've also seen how we can use Dropzone.js to send AJAX requests, and how we can add a CORSMiddleware to our FastAPI app object in order to allow FastAPI to handle file uploads from a different origin that are coming from an AJAX request. And if you want to extend this example, because we have async functions in FastAPI, what you could do is you could use this library here. It's called AIO files, and this allows you to use async IO when you're reading and opening files and other operations on files, and that can help you in some situations perform actions much more efficiently with files. You can look into that, and you can use this library with FastAPI, and that's because FastAPI works natively with async IO and async functions in Python. So that's all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.